Broadcasting for you high atop of Florida's peninsula at 108 feet. This is Alpha Mike on episode number 88 of Raider Cop Nation. The topic today, the Bonanno crime family, and this is a part of the Wise Guy series. Last episode, 87, we discussed the new platform of 5 series that will go out. On this one, the Wise Guy series, we're going to start off with the traditional Costa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia. We're going to go into the traditional cartels, and we're going to talk about other organized crime groups that people don't even know that are organized. It is to teach you new knowledge. Now, a lot of this stuff is no longer a secret because the government has successfully imprisoned many of them. So there are hours and hours and hours of transcripts that you can read and enjoy. And there are stories upon stories of the mafia in America. But what we want to do is we want to discuss a little bit of how they got here, who they are, why they exist, and how do they function in today's environment. So sit back and enjoy. We are definitely going to take a ride. Now, speaking of a ride, let's take a small little break. Do you have Uncle Tony's gun that you've had in the drawer at home? It's all rusted out. It's not working very good. And you're wondering, does this thing even function? Well, I know the solution. Pistol Pete over in Miami. Pistol Pete the gunsmith will definitely fix that up. Make it brand new. Not a little brand new, but brand spanking new for all your gunsmith needs. That's the only guy you need to look up. Pistol Pete, the gunsmith. Of course, in our show notes, we have his information. And it's easier than 1, 2, 3, boxing that and shipping it to him. Well, he'll tell you how to do it. Give Pistol Pete a call. He'll give you the instructions. It's really easy. It's federal firearms dealer to federal firearms dealer. Not a problem for Pistol Pete. And when you go on there and you go and you call him and you go on his Facebook page as well as his website itself, you can see all the magic that Pistol Pete produces. Now, of course, we always have the leadership quote of the day or the week, and we definitely are going to bring you that before we start the nitty-gritty. So let's go off to the leadership quote of the week. And our quote this week from our good friend Lucky Luciano: "There's no such thing as good money or bad money. There's just money." Charles Lucky Luciano. And of course, here on Raider Cop Nation, the Wise Guy series, you can find out who Lucky Luciano was. But today we're going to feature the Bonanno crime family. Got a lot on the plate, so let's get started.
Gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the main event.
This is episode number 88, where we're going to speak about Don Peppino Bonanno, the father, as he quoted, of the Bonanno family. Now, the Bonanno family was awarded to Joseph Bonanno in 1931. Now, we're not going to go into in depth so much of the history because this would be a 72-hour episode. So for time and for the sake of keeping people awake, we're going to cut straight to 1931. Now, prior to that, there was, of course, uh, a, a non-organized, organized crime, if that makes sense. And then they came the customary wars that Lucky Luciano and so forth were involved in, removing the old guard, or better known as the Mustache Pete's, and they established in 1931 the Commission, which today still exists. The Commission at the time awarded Joe Bonanno his own family at the tender age of 26. He moves through his family, of course, like all mafiosos at the time. He's from a sacred tradition coming from areas of Sicily. And, of course, he brings that Sicilian mindset into this organized crime. Now, not all mafiosos are Sicilian, but they are from Italian descent. Born in Castellamelli del Golfo in the province of Trapani, Sicily, emerges the boss of the Bonanno family, Joseph Bonanno. He arrives in America at a very young age, but he's already somewhat seasoned when he comes from Sicily, where the honored tradition had been placed forth in his head. As we said, the commission in 1931 awards him his own family. He moves into areas from bootlegging that was prior to 1931, and then he moves into gambling, loan sharking, prostitution, all these rackets that the mob has always had, but also narcotics, even though he adamantly denies it. Bonanno comes from a tradition where the Sicilians would say they were men of honor, and we'll talk about a biography that he did, which cost everybody greatly, and we'll explain that later on. But their sacred tradition is basically the boss is the boss, and he ruled. In astonishing history of the mafia, he ruled his family for over 30 years, which in itself is legendary. And it goes to show you the effectiveness of law enforcement against mafia influence, that to even think that a mob boss can control a family for more than 3 years today is monumental. Imagine what 30 did. The reason he triumphed so long is because it took a while and took very long for American law enforcement to catch up. Now, there was an interview where Joseph Bonanno was interviewed by 60 Minutes, and this claim comes from Ira Rosen, which is a 60 Minutes producer. He basically says that the power of the mafia over the FBI was that Lansky, Meyer Lansky, and we'll talk about him in the future in the Wise Guys series of Raider Cop Nation, he was the bearer of the secret. He's the one that had the picture. When they pressed him for what he was saying, he said, yeah, he had the picture of J. Edgar Hoover and the discovery of the mafia that he was homosexual. So they bribed J. Edgar Hoover. That's from Joseph Bonanno. So he's the bearer of many, many secrets of La Cosa Nostra in America, dating back his roots prior to 1931, actually. So the credibility that he has is tremendous. Of course, there was a couple of exaggerations here or there. Nevertheless, he rules his family for over 30 years. And then the dispute came in. Now, there are some things that we need to note. We're going to take a little sidebar, and we're going to get involved with some statistics. Today, the mafia is created of 9 families, And a lot of people don't know the exact number, but you have the five families from New York. Of course, you have Chicago, which is considered and called the outfit, and the New Jersey Mafia, New England, and Philadelphia, making up the nine. All the other families that used to exist, Louisiana and Tampa and all that, they're gone almost. They don't exist. Their territories do exist. In other words, these nine families can take over those areas if they feel like they can go ahead and venture into that area, that market. So what we need to know is the mindset. How do you become a mafioso? Now, today, if you are a soldier, and those are the rankings of the mafia, you have soldier, capo, and of course the hierarchy starting with the underboss and the boss. And then there's the position of consigliere, which is the counselor to the boss that the boss picks. So let's break it down. First, you have the soldier. Now, the soldier is usually picked because he knows people. He just didn't apply for the job and hand in his resume and say, I would like to be a soldier in the mafia. He knows people. He grew up with people. He knows the way of thinking. A lot of them usually come from their roots. Uncles, cousins, brothers, fathers, grandfathers were all a part of the lifestyle. So they're nurtured in there too. You have to have Italian ancestry. And that in itself, that rule from back in the 30s was lightened up a bit for the new mafia generation. In the older generation, you had to have mother and father had to be Italian. The new one is just your father has to be Italian. So you can't get into this sacred society without having an Italian father. Now, in 1931, when Luciano created the commission with other bosses, of course, he also had his eye on what was called and considered the syndicate. And that was a criminal enterprise that ranged from Murder Incorporated and other areas of crime and other ethnicity, the Irish, the Jewish mobs, and so forth. And they could work together on certain criminal aspects. But the Italian mafia didn't like that, what they called disorganization. They only knew what they learned in the old country, and that things ran in a paramilitary mindset. So they wanted their own organized crime. Of course, Lansky and Luciano agreed to it to make the Italian mafiosos comfortable in the syndicate operations. The five families in New York were very much into the old ways, where there was a fluctuation in the Chicago outfit, which did use the syndicate more so than anybody else. So you've come from the old country, you've come from the old neighborhood, you're learning the ways, your family's a part of it, your friends are a part of it. There's no secret who you are. I'm always dumbfounded how a guy like Donnie Brasco, and in the movie Donnie Brasco, where the FBI agent infiltrates the Bonanno family, crippling it, and he's there for many, many years, and that's going to be an episode also. It's tremendous undercover work that was created, but here's a guy that really nobody knew in the mob. There was no history. There was no family ties. This guy just showed up. He ends up infiltrating the mafia on one principle and one principle only: pure greed. He masqueraded as a jewelry thief, and they all liked what he was selling. As a result, for years being infiltrated, he was even proposed for induction as a soldier because he was an earner. So what is an earner? Is a person that brings in money. So prior to being a soldier, you have to be an associate. An associate is connected to a soldier. The associates go out and produce money, rackets, all kinds of schemes. And if they get into any trouble, they reach out to their soldier of the family that they're associated with, and everything is resolved. Of course, the difference between an associate and a soldier is that the soldier is governed by the commission and therefore is a man of respect. That's what they consider it. An associate is expendable. You can get rid of him, two in the back of the head, and send him to swimming with the fishes, especially if he's not that good of an earner. Now, of course, if he is an earner, they're going to protect him tooth and nail. So associates are usually proposed for membership in this exclusive club to become a soldier. Now, the ceremonial aspect of it is also from old tradition, the burning of the saint in your hand and giving the oath and blah, 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 blah. Of course, that oath means less today than it did when it was first created, but today it's mostly symbolic. So now you've become a soldier in a specific mafia family, and here we're talking about the Bonannos. You will have to be assigned to a captain, which is called a capo. Now, this capo will, of course, direct you in what you need to do, and you, as a soldier, have to produce and give him a kickback on whatever your rackets are. Some capos demand a specific amount monthly, and there's no questions about it. When the capo calls, you come. So the capo becomes your boss in a sense. The hierarchy on top is something foreign to you as a soldier because you're just looking at the capo as your boss. Capos move money. The higher they are earners in the organization, the more clout they have in the organization with the underboss, the boss. Now, the position of the consigliere that we discuss is an appointed counselor that the boss places. Sometimes these bosses have placed relatives or close friends. Of course, they have to be inducted in the family. But they're not there because of any specific reason other than they give counsel. The real job of the consigliere is to basically talk the boss out of certain things that he might be pissed at over a soldier's actions that have caused some type of disrespect to the family, and because of the old tradition, the sentence would be death, let's say. So the consigliere kind of has to smoothen that over. He's a liaison between those underworld soldier figures and the boss all the way on the top. Now, of course, if you come and you start whining and complaining to the consigliere, he might tell the boss, and because you're whining like a little Girl Scout, you might get whacked. So as you can tell, the consigliere now has turned into a position of power. In the hierarchy, he's probably number 3. But a consigliere doesn't really have muscle, but he has influence as long as the boss is the boss and the boss is breathing. The consigliere exists. So that's the structure, understanding how that works. Give you an example. Another example is you have a soldier, and that soldier might have, let's say, 100 associates underneath them. And those associates are all kicking money up to the soldier. The capo might have 10 soldiers underneath him. So now you got a kind of understanding of the size and magnitude of this. Now, the reality is that a lot of soldiers, they don't really produce anything. It's a small percentage that are bringing in the tons of money. The ones that are just there for shits and giggles, they're put to work by the producers, the earners. They give them small things to do. Go do this, go get this, go do that, because they're not very good earners. They're either not educated or they just don't have any business smarts, but they're gangsters. So they're put to work by the earners. The earners have a place. They immediately are identified by the organization and they move up the corporate structure. And we are going to look at the phenomena of what's called musical chairs and how law enforcement has not picked up the musical chair theme, or they're playing that they haven't understood the musical chair theme. And I'll explain that in a second. All right, so we move on. Bonanno now goes into the mid 60s in a dispute. Now there's errors in the mafia that we need to look at that are very important. 1931, 1957, 1975, and 1985. So take out your crayons and your cardboard boxes, kids, and let's write these dates down when we're dealing with the Italian mafia, because in every family, these are time periods that affected these families greatly. Of course, 1931 was the creation of the commission. So it placed a organized criminal empire together under one umbrella, a board of directors. And for you to do something outside the day-to-day operations of the criminal empire, you needed the board approval. Without it, it could cost you greatly. 1957 was another crucial change in mafia leadership. In 1957 is where there are radical moves now to move Albert Anastasia, which was the head of Murder Incorporated, and his underboss at the time, Carlo Gambino, kind of played Parcheesi and made a deal with the commission. So they got rid of Albert. Boom, he's gone. Gambino laid in that position. Same thing with Profaci. They kind of moved him out of the way, and they threw in a good capo, which turned rat, by the name of Colombo, Joe Colombo. Now, when I mean rat, he didn't inform the federal authorities of what was going on. He informed the commission that Joseph Bonanno and Profaci wanted to kill Gambino, and they wanted to and Lucchese, and they wanted to make some moves of their own on the commission. For a reward for being a good rat to the commission, Gambino instilled in Colombo his own family, kicked out Profaci, kicking the pants with him, and to make matters cementing the deal, they changed the name from the Profaci family to the Colombo family. But Joe Bonanno now, in this era, he's on thin ice now as of 1957, because the new commission members, the new bosses, Carlo Gambino, did not like that he was undermining and trying to get rid of him. Of course, that would piss people off. 1975, why is that date is important? Well, this is the date. Now, from the 60s all the way up until probably the early 70s, they're not inducting anybody. It's like you've got soldiers that are 90 years old, and the bosses were content with what was coming in, and they kept everything on the low end, and they weren't replacing their soldiers to the magnitude they should have. And this was an era that was important because when they started opening the books, They were creating the new leadership, which started folding like cheap suits later on. So it might have been a critical mistake of the mafia on 2 points. Number one, not making and inducting new members on somewhat of a percentage basis every 3, 4, 5 years, and just going cold turkey from the late 50s to all of a sudden the 70s. And all of a sudden, oh, look, we ain't got enough guys. What the hell? And now we're running around just inducting anybody. And those anybody's will become future leaders, and they really don't have what it takes because they were never mentored. Then, 1985, the most crucial of the years for the mafia, especially because of Joseph Bonanno. It's the commission case against the commission. The FBI and the Justice Department put together their case where they charged all the bosses of all 5 families of having a conspiracy to this commission thing. Well, where are they going to get the evidence for this? Well, Joseph Bonanno wrote his famous biography that was published in 1983 called A Man of Honor. And on there, he spilled his guts out about the commission. And as a result, a young prosecutor in New York by the name of Rudy Giuliani read it and said, this is a godsend. This guy actually spelled all this crap out for us. And they prosecuted these guys. Of course, Bonanno was on the shelf since 1969. Putting on the shelf means he wasn't an active boss. That was the agreement he had reached with the commission at the time. I'll go away, just leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. And they agreed upon it. And he wrote this book and nobody was paying attention, and bam, everybody got hit. So their hierarchy at that time, 1985, it's of all from the 5 families, 4 of them were just cremated, and that would be the Colombo family, Lucchese, Gambino, and of course Genovese. The Bonanno family really didn't have an effect because Bonanno was just writing about stuff that he knew about, and he really didn't know about his own family, believe it or not, in the 80s. A lot of the because he had been put on the shelf. So these are important dates to remember and to understand in the Mafia Wise Guy series that we're doing. All right, so now we're rolling into the disputed age of the 60s, and there's a list of characters that the commission had placed, and I'm not going to go into this guy and that guy because they don't mean anything to you, the listener. They were placed in there by the commission while Bonanno was on the run. Now, he did in 1964 say that he was kidnapped while walking with his attorney down the street in Manhattan. Now, you're the boss of a family in the middle of a war, the Bonanno Wars, and you don't have bodyguards? Nobody believes that. So obviously, it was later disputed in the testimony of a New Jersey crime family that said that Bonanno created that whole thing up. He was on the run, and he went to his cousin Mangano for protection. And Mangano up in Buffalo, New York, kept him there for 6 weeks until he couldn't take him anymore. He said, get lost, you're on your own. So Bonanno was on the run at this point because he knew that the commission they were going to kill him eventually. So he decided to run. That caused the Bonanno Wars, and there's a lot of dispute of who's boss and who's not because the Bonanno crime family was split into 2 factions. The faction that the commission had approved and said, okay, you're the boss, and the loyalist, the one that says, who's this guy going to be boss? This guy, he ain't nobody. So these 2 fractions, they're just fighting it out, shooting it out daily on the street, and that went on for years. So in 1973 now, this is an important date in the Bonanno family, they come up with a ruling commission of Joe Diamond Evoli, Joe DeFipli, and Phil Rusty Rastelli. These 3 now are capos, and they're going to run the daily activity of the Bonanno family. Now, the commission came up with the panel of three because the disrespect, if they pick somebody, well, no, you picked him because he's a puppet of so-and-so. So to avoid that, they came up with the council of three in a family. That will play into our musical chair scenario down the road in a few minutes. When Phil Rastelli finally takes over in 1973, he's appointed the boss because our other two commission members or capos, Joe Diamond and Joe DeFipoli, they die out. Simple as that. They are old age and I'm going to prison, I'm dying, they died. So Rastelli now, Rusty Rastelli, which is a capo in Maspeth, Queens, he takes over. And he was true to legendary form. Today, there's not too much known about him. He was born in Brooklyn. That's it. Nobody knows where he came from, what his family was. He's a freaking mystery even to the mob. But he's a loyalist because he spent so many years behind bars and he never sang. And as a result of that, he had respect of many soldiers and capos out on the street. They respect in all different families because Rusty Rastelli wouldn't talk. Now, Rastelli has a young protege underneath him. Showed him the rackets early on, and that would be Joe Massino. Now, we're going to get to him in a minute. But while Rusty Rastelli's in prison from 73 to 91, Carmine Galante comes out in 74. Now, Carmine Galante was an important figure in the Bonanno family under Joe Bonanno. At one time, he could have been the underboss, and, of course, he was a capo. He was from the old town in Sicily where Joe was from, and therefore he dealt in, let's say, narcotics like McDonald's deals in Big Macs. And he's an earner. So he did a long stint in prison where he started talking real tough behind bars that when he goes out in the street, he's going to take what's his. Because at the end, he was a Bonanno loyalist and he didn't like what all this crap that was going on. People were going to have to deal with him when he got outside. Tough guy, and a lot of the other mob families didn't want to deal with him, and they definitely didn't want to mess with him. Comes out and he starts dealing in heroin in big bushels. This is during the era of what is known as the French Connection. And Galante's up into his kneecaps into a lot of this stuff. He's very arrogant, very flamboyant. He has positioned himself as acting boss. Rastelli, basically, to keep the peace, has allowed him to be the street boss or the acting boss while he's in prison. But a lot of people were uncomfortable with Galante, cigar-toking Galante at the helm. So his demise comes after he starts flipping his mouth in 1979, July 1979. They got rid of him with a couple of shotgun blasts at Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant on Knickerbocker Avenue in Brooklyn. And that was the end of Joe Galante. Died with cigar in mouth and everything. And Rastelli, he reached out to his protege, Joseph Massino. And he basically said, now this is a young guy, he's just a soldier at the time. And he said, you tell people that I sent you. Now the reason he could say that is because Massino was from Rastelli's crew in Maspeth, Queens. Everybody knew if he used Rastelli's name, it's got to be true. He went to the other families and he told them, Phil wants to whack Carmine Galante because he's dealing in dope, and that's a no-no. Now, that's one of those rules that the mafia has. That's a rule, but not really a rule. It's a wink and a nod. and that is you're not allowed to deal in drugs because drugs is bad business and we don't do that. But a lot of them do it. But if you get caught, it's a death sentence. So this guy's just blatantly, Carmine Galante, blatantly out there doing this stuff, and who's going to do anything about it? So the commission heard the argument from Massino as a message that was coming from Rastelli, and of course at that point they gave the okay to get rid of him. Massino gets the guys together, his crew of murderers, all three of them. He used what is the term of zips. They're Sicilians. They're imported from Sicily into the mob. They know the ways of the mob, and they're sitting around waiting for something to do. Now, some of them don't even speak good English. They get into rackets and all that. But the American mobsters are like, well, you guys are sitting around here with your hands in your pockets. You need to get your hands dirty. So they would send them on contract hits. So Massino placed three of them together, and their problem with Carmine Galante ended up on the floor, and that was the end of it. So as a result of that, Rastelli now gives Massino a position of capo. Rastelli is still in prison. He's there in and out a couple of times, but up until like 91. So in 91 is where we see Joe Massino come into fold. Now, Massino got hit with a big case later on, but Massino was so powerful in the Bonanno family from 91 into 2004 that the commission actually wanted to change the name of the Bonanno family to the Massino family. But because Big Joe Massino made a huge mistake, the commission said, no, we'll rethink that. See, the mistake that Massino made was he became a rat. Yes, that's right, a government informant in 2004. So you can't have a family if you're going to be a rat. That's just either or. You're on our side or on their side. But he was effective. When he took over power, he came out of prison. He was going in and out of prison. When he came out of prison, he said, Massino, we're going to do away with these social clubs and all this stuff that got us in trouble in the 80s with John Gotti. And he had a mandate that all capos and soldiers had to report once a week to the social club. And the FBI just stood there taking pictures all day long of everybody showing up. It was an asinine freaking policy of his, but his ego was bigger than his brain. And as a result, everybody went unwillingly. They knew that was going to be a huge, huge mistake. At this point, I was really looking at more information of how Massino came up with these decisions. Now, obviously, I'm a firm believer in mentorship. So his boss at the time, Rusty Rastelli, after his passing, he had really instilled that in Massino's head. All this attraction of what we do is not a part of our world, and we need to get rid of it. But I also believe he came up with a theory, and that is the musical chair theory that we talked about earlier. And how the musical chair theory works is there are a panel of three capos that are placed over the family. Now, let's get back into the Bonanno family, and then I'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, so Massino, 91 to 2004 boss, all of a sudden in 2004, he's looking at a death sentence on him, a couple of murders that he did. So he reached out to the prosecutor and said, wait a minute, hold on. I got some stories to tell you, but you got to take away the death sentence. And he chirped like a bird, devastated. This guy was the boss of the commission at this point. Remember I told you in 1985, all the bosses went down, okay? So you had Persico, the Colombo family, gone. You had Gotti, gone. But first Paul Castellano was indicted, but Gotti said, well, I'll get rid of it for the government. And then Gotti ended up getting it. And then you had the Genovese family with Fat Tony Salerno and the Lucchese family. All these people, their leadership with Tony Ducks Colorado over at the Lucchese family, they all got imprisoned for 100 years in 1985 over Joe Bonanno's freaking memoirs and his biography, A Man of Honor, talking about the commission. But Joe Massino was in prison at the time, and he was the acting boss of the Bonanno family. So now this is greatly weighed upon him. We got to change the way we freaking do business. When he comes out in the street, he's the boss of bosses now. The new kids on the block are looking at him like, boy, this guy's it. And he comes up with some strict guidelines, and one of them is that he says, no attention to yourself. And we've got the musical chair commission. All right, so after he goes state and starts talking about everything that went on in '04, the new boss is Vinny Gorgeous Biscayano. Now, he was boss from '04 to '11. He brought in a lot of Sicilians. He started bringing in the Olmeda, the oath, and don't talk, and all that other stuff, and really started bringing up the numbers. So together with what Massino had done and Vinny Gorgeous, they created a monster where the Bonanno family had over 150 soldiers, and put that in mathematical terms. And of course, he goes to prison, and now we have a list of acting bosses. Today, the acting boss is a guy by the name of Joe C. But that's not who you need to look at, because it is actually a commission of guys. Now, the musical chair concept is, if you're a boss and you're in jail, then you're the boss. Why? Because you're in jail. Now, if the family head is not in jail, it's ring around the rosy who's in charge, because they establish the three capos as the ruling panel. And they're usually the three earners. But since it's hard to figure out who's earning, who's not, who's doing what, let's say you have 15 capos in one family, or 20 capos, law enforcement now is sucking their thumb trying to figure out who's the boss. The soldiers on the street really don't know it either. Of course, they're not stupid, but they're told, hey, your job is to report to so-and-so. Don't worry about who's giving the freaking orders on the top. So this has really thrown off law enforcement and buffered the people on the top. It was greatly needed, because the people on the top, people like Paul Castellano, they didn't have much respect for soldiers. They didn't really even deal with them. And I believe that was the demise of these bosses. They didn't socialize with the little folks. So these panels now are regarded as street bosses. And they know from associates to soldiers to capos. But let's say you got 3 in a ruling panel and 2 go to jail, 2 are replaced, and the other one stays, and you still, who the hell's in charge? It's just a ruling panel. They play musical chairs, and they pass it along. It's a board of directors type of setup, and it keeps the authorities on their toes trying to figure out who's who. Of course, nowadays, the federal government is more concerned with the hairspray that the president is using than La Cosa Nostra, and the mafia has flourished big time. Today we look at the Bonanno family. It is a family by name. Joe Bonanno was, as he called it, the father of the family. But it has stayed more as of a name of legacy than anything. They did try to change it during Massino's era, but Massino changed that by becoming a cooperative witness in '04. So they kind of ruled and said, you know what, just keep the old man's name and that's it. We'll move on from there. Now, the commission has the ruling panel. So you go, how do you get 3 people in one family to be on a commission? Well, they choose who that person's going to be. but it's always musical chairs. It's never the same person. So the interest of the family is always first paramount over the individual person. What you might have had with a greedy boss is always grabbing that money. Here, it's about the family interest. So it makes it much more difficult. The Bonanno family today has grown in muscle, in money, in power. Over 150 soldiers. They're reported to have at least 15 capos, and they have sprung their operation wherever they can land. Their strong points, of course, in Brooklyn, Bronx, and Queens. Of course, that doesn't stop them from going to Staten Island and all the other places. And they're not only in the city of New York. They have expanded to Canada, where there was Rizzuto family, which is just an offspring of the Bonanno family. A lot of people like to call them the sixth family and all this other stuff. He's just a capo. He was part of the Bonanno family. And we will have a series on Rizzuto's because there's a struggle up there, up in Canada. But that was an extension and the foresight of Joe Bonanno in the 60s when he chose to go up to Canada and disrespected the commission at the time, especially his cousin Magadino out of Buffalo, which said, hey, that area is supposed to be designated for me. And Joe said, sucks to be you. I'm on the move. And created the Mafia in Canada. They're in Florida. They are everywhere they can go. The Bonanno crime family. Where will they end up? Who knows? But I don't think the organized crime is as strong as it once was. I know for a fact that they're not producing the money that they once did. Law enforcement likes to say, well, they're nothing more than a street gang, which is a bunch of baloney. They're still organized, they're still deadly, and they're still looking for rackets to control. For us to basically say that they are non-existent and they're bigger and better, I wouldn't go that route right away. They're still very organized in any other criminal organization. And they have a steady supply to pick from for their future, not only from the streets of New York, the streets in the U.S., and the streets in Sicily and Italy. They are just growing in numbers, and they're on everything. Of course, some of their logic is all about the greed of money, and that is the root of all evil, as we know, and people will talk if hit with hard sentences. So the Bonanno family has brought in a lot of Sicilians from the old country, the Zips. A little more difficult for them to talk because a lot of their family relatives are still in Sicily. And in Sicily, if they open up the newspaper there and see that you are cooperating with American law enforcement agencies, let's just say that your immediate family may not be liked in the neighborhood. And that would be a problem. The Bonanno crime family, they have made a lot of havoc in this country and a lot of money. They still exist, folks. They haven't gone anywhere. Now, as usual, we will continue on the Rated Cop Nation Wise Guy series, coming up with a list of shows. Of course, we're going to cover the other four families in New York. We're going to go to New Jersey. We're going to go to Philadelphia. We're going to go to Chicago. And we're going to go to New England. We're going to discuss these other families. And then when we finish talking about them, we're going to cross the Atlantic and we're going to go to Sicily. We're going to talk about the great octopus over there, known as the Sicilian Mafia. There's a lot to listen to, a lot you can grow from listening to Rated Cop Nation. Most of the information that I told you here today, public knowledge, you can pick it up, dime a dozen. Just pick up any transcript of any grand jury and you can read about it. But the mindset of the bad guys is what a lot of people are concerned with, and some law enforcement really doesn't understand it. So the question might be, well, how in the world do you know all this? Let's just say that I have a friend that has a friend that knows a friend. This is Alpha Mike, encouraging you to continue in prayer for yourself, for your family, for your community, and for the law enforcement agency that serves you. But most importantly, always keeping in prayer the United States of America. Till we meet again, this is Alpha Mike, over and out.
And guide her through the night with a light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet.
That's right. Telephone tough guy. Put Vito on a phone.
Take it easy. We're not making a Western here.